Hello, beautiful people. You are listening to the Communal Table podcast, part of Food and Wine Pro. I'm your host, Kat Kinsman. My guest today, I was just laughing. I've been chasing him around with microphones for, I'm trying to figure out, like 12 years or something. He is a man in motion, and he is always has a new project, has a new book, traveling somewhere, doing something for other people. He's just one of the most interesting, not just people in food, but humans on the planet. And I have to say, one of the best senses of style that definitely the best dressed person we've ever had on this podcast, Marcus Samuelsson.
How are you? I mean, that's not an undersell. We agreed on an undersell.
I didn't give all the titles. If you want to
undersell is the best way to be introduced because then you can leave and like really deliver.
Well, here's the thing though. I didn't mention all of your projects. So Red Rooster, Ginny's, Eat Up Harlem, a new project that is an Audible single.
Well, it is not. I wouldn't even say it's new. I think what I love about the Red Rooster Cookbook can now be realized through Audible, right?
Yeah.
So the people that tell the story of our Harlem is the same amazing people that I've learned from for the last 15 years, right? That what is a sense of place, who really knows Harlem to its core much, much better than me, and I've been lucky enough to present part of it. But we learn about, entrepreneurship from Mr. Dapper Dan. We learn about style from Miss Lana Turner. We learn about art and being in a neighborhood from Thelma Golden. We learn about the Apollo through some amazing people. So that really was what the cookbook is. But then to be able to tell that in a new medium, that makes me so happy because that Harlem is a state of mind and a sense of place, and it touches our neighborhood. And all of us kind of we need that. And I knew that I certainly needed that when I moved to Harlem, and that's why I feel so connected and happy that in new formats, in new technology, new mediums, we can tell that story worldwide.
Yeah, let's explain what this Audible Cookbook is and how what the format of this is.
Yeah. I mean, when I make a cookbook, right, a cookbook for me, it always takes 4 years to make, right?
People don't really. They think, I'm going to write some recipes.
Yeah, so for me, it's like, what's the narrative and what's the neighborhood look like? And I really think through what is the music, what's the score going to look like, right? What are the recipes to that? And what delicious, food can we cook around that, right? And how can we tell the story about the anonymous cook to the visible cooks, and what stories are we trying to tell? And that is really, when you read the Red Rooster Cookbook, that's what's in it, right? But sometimes it takes, so where does a cookbook like that fit and belong, right? It's part cookbook, it's part narrative. So I do think when the beautiful people from Audible came around and say, hey, we want to convert this into, you're going to do some cooking. So I cook 7 recipes. I cook a whole week, Monday to Sunday.
And you talk through the recipes.
Yes. And then I bring into that kitchen some amazing storytellers like Jessica Harris.
Oh, Dr. Jessica Harris.
Exactly.
Oh.
and I cook with, Dapper Dan. Or you hear stories because that's what we felt would be the best way. And then we have music around that. So whether you're on your way to work or you're driving one of those summer drives, you can be part of Harlem and you can be inspired and maybe think about, okay, what part of Harlem can I bring to my neighborhood and what does that look like? And it touches about everything. It talks about cooking, it touches about neighborhood and soul,
So the last time that I was saying I've been chasing you around because you're in motion, but we got to sit down a few years ago when I was still at CNN, and we hosted a supper. We had the series of things called Secret Supper, where we invited people, save the date. We didn't tell them where they were going to be until the day of, and we would invite artists and farmers and activists and chefs and have everybody sit around a big table, and we would invite other chefs. So it was you, George Mendez, Suvir Saran, Eddie Wong. And and Don Lemon from CNN was with us too. And as an exercise, we had everybody fill in a name tag where they identified themselves not just by their name, but how they sort of described themselves. We asked people, what is your cultural heritage? And I said something on like, suburban born white chick recovering Catholic, art school girl, something like that, and trying to figure out what my identifiers were for this. And it was an interesting exercise for me to see how other people would take it. Would they take race? Would they take place? Would they take religion? What it was? I don't remember what you put on your name tag, but what would your name tag say now?
I think, like most people, we are many things, right? And I have some, incredible experiences that maybe in one way have made it easier for me to hold on to those. African, adopted, and I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
I can be at an airport and someone walks up to me with any, and we start to talk about adoption because he was adopted or they just adopted,
Yeah.
right? Definitely a Swede, an immigrant, and a Harlemite, and the luxury of being a black man, all of those. And then you add more than anything, a cook, because without cooking, I wouldn't be here, and I don't know my adult life without cooking. It's all one. And I've lucky enough to be able to escape into those different worlds, and cooking has been the thread through that. Obviously family and cooking has been the thread, but all of those things have made it easier for me to see other people, right? Like I've been an immigrant. So when I say immigrant, people, maybe think that's, it's a joke or something like that. But I've been an immigrant. I've been an immigrant 6 times. Right?
Oh, what is your path?
So obviously, when you are adopted, you don't really immigrant, but you are removed, and that sets you up for something being other and different.
Absolutely.
Right? When you do that cross race, it definitely sets you up.
Right.
Then at a very young age, I started cooking in Japan and Switzerland and France, and when you take language away, Kat, you start to develop other senses, right? You smell the food, you look in someone's eyes, you have to connect through people's eyes, and you still got to deliver at a very high level. So the complexity of that, so you can smell a situation right away, or you have to connect with someone's eyes, or you have to ask somebody for how to take the right subway to work, right? Without speaking the same language. And then on top of that, Blackness on top of that, right? So those adds very, very unique situations, and I've been fortunate enough to be in those situations, and both go into them, but also come out of them with richer experiences.
Yeah, I've seen you as a guidepost for a lot of people, but I came across a treasure recently. I'm not sure when this episode is going to air, but by this point, I assume Korsha Wilson, extraordinary writer, did an incredible profile of the sadly departed Patrick Clark, who was a chef in New York in the 80s, 90s. Really important black chef who was... He was cooking, he was helming the kitchen at Odeon when he was 24.
Cafe Luxembourg.
Yeah, like really important places and really making his mark. And, New York born person whose legacy has really gotten lost in a pretty shameful way.
But think about that also, because it was a young McNally driving force of Odeon, right? So Odeon at that point, was an artist heaven, right? So very creative. So Basquiat, Andy, the creative, and in there was Patrick doing French sauces and things like that. It's very, very ahead of his time. Right?
Oh, he absolutely. Well, the thing is, like, he was so ahead of his time, and he had sort of gotten lost in the conversation following it. But I found a book while working with Korsha on this thing, and it was a tribute that. That had been done. It was Charlie Trotter who had done this book, getting together all the culinary world, paying homage to this man who, he at a very young age he won a James Beard Award. He just had all these incredible accomplishments, and people wanted to support his family because he died in his
42?
of a heart condition and left behind a family, a son who still cooks in New York.
Yeah, Preston.
I found a quote from you
Yeah.
in there,
Sure.
and I saw it, and like my whole body got goosebumps. And you were talking about the importance of Patrick Clark and giving you a guidepost, making you feel like you had a place because he was somebody with dark skin who was working in a kitchen. Can you talk a little bit about seeing somebody like Patrick Clark?
Yeah,
you were a baby.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick was everything. I mean, Patrick was, I love Patrick, right? Because Patrick was, when I came to New York, the people that looked like me, there was Miss Leah Chase in New Orleans, and it was Miss Sylvia Woods, and it was Miss Alberta Wright, which is an amazing lady that passed away a couple of years ago, and she owned Jezebel's. And then it was Mr. Patrick Clark, right? And Patrick was a chef, who worked at the White House with the Clintons. He studied in France, so his path I could relate to, in a very specific way, because I've been to France. And, Patrick also was old school, So Patrick, when he called me, I don't think he ever asked me anything. He said, Patrick, so I said, Chef, it's Patrick. It's like, come up, we got to do this. And like, he didn't even ask where I was, what I was doing, because, there was before cell phones, so you were in your kitchen, of course.
Right.
And he didn't care if we had something to do. You just went there. I was like, Chef, I'll be there later. And literally, I just had to walk up to wherever he was. And he gathered all, a bunch of chefs, because this was the most important thing that was going on, whatever it was, right? So he made you feel part of something, and in the most loving way. And he was, I remember Preston, when Patrick died,
he was young.
Yeah, he was just 16 years old. And then after he finished CIA, he came and worked with me for 3 years.
I didn't realize that.
And then after I thought he graduated with us at Aquavit, we sent him to Jean Georges, and he worked for Jean Georges for maybe 8-9 years. And it was all of our responsibility to raise Preston, And Preston is a wonderful guy. He works for Noir right now, and he's been with Noir for a good 5 years, and he's a very successful chef in his own. But I'll tell you also about the book, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of my big mentors is Mr. Charlie Trotter. Was Mr. Charlie Trotter, right? And Charlie had the same thing. He's like, when this thing happened with Patrick, Charlie just said like this, hey, Marcus, you need to test these 20 recipes because we're going to put out a book and it's money going to go to Patrick's family. There's no questions. Like all of a sudden my fax machine in Aquavit just started to shake, and it was like a whole list. So you work 16 hours and then like after service you got to do recipe testing for Charlie Trotter for Patrick Clark's book, and we put this book out.
But you're going to do it.
You're going to do it because it's your mentor, your buddy, your everything. So the chef's community works in this incredible way of connectivity. And, Charlie was a chef that really could open up the world for younger chefs, but also connected chefs, whether it was from Ferran Adrià to Little Arun in Chicago, right? So you have, or Patrick Clark and Tatsuya in Sydney. So again, it is during internet sort of starts, but it's really not internet and food. It's not really connected. So Charlie does this from Chicago, and Patrick is part of that, and therefore I have to do that. And you want to do it, and it's just. And the big dinner was at Tavern on the Green.
Oh yes.
And it was a big deal.
I had a friend who was working for Charlie at the time, and he was telling me about flying in and working at it. And I actually had I have to buy another copy because I gave mine to Kwame when he was on the podcast. His mom used to take him to go and eat Patrick's food when he was growing up, and he was little, and and he's talked a lot about not having, really having to seek out people to be mentors to him, coming up through the kitchens, and that's a hard path. And I've seen you do that for people coming up. It's the sort of nurturing of talent. And does it feel like, I always think of kitchens right now as sort of the past, present, future kind of thing. How are you identifying young talent and reaching out to them and letting them know that they have a place?
Well, I think my style of cooking and the subject we've been cooking about really drives a certain individual, right? I was really a minority when I was cooking Swedish food in Midtown, right? I didn't look at it being a minority from being a black person, but I was looking at a minority as being a Scandinavian person, right?
Yeah, let's talk about how you got to Aquavit.
So, but like from that mind, right?
Yeah.
So I'm in Midtown. There were no cooks that knew who I was, right?
Right.
So the cooks that came were very often, if Rick Moonen was kind enough to send me one over, if Gray Coons, they were all around me, send one over, if John George sent one over. So the tribe became the tribe. It was like a punk band, right? And then a couple of months later, people wanted to be there, right? But the first tribe was really with the Vinnies and the Kingsleys, and the all the beautiful misfits that came to my kitchen.
Beautiful misfits.
Yeah, they were there because the food, right? And they wanted to learn about pickling and preserving and smoking and all of that stuff. So then that became us against them, whoever them were, and so once we got the stars, it was easier for us.
So let's talk. Well, you got you were the first. You're the youngest person to get 3 Michelin stars.
No, at that point it was just New York Times. Michelin didn't come. Or
sorry,
the
but the youngest person to get 3 New York Times stars.
Yeah,
there.
But so that obviously helped. But there was other things. And again, this is before social media. So at 97, we did vegetarian tasting menu every night, and we did a 16-course bite menu. So those were the people who were into that. Yeah, those were the people who came, right?
I went there in the late 90s,
and that's a very specific person. So, and then the other thing that I think helped was that I was the same age as the young cooks that were there, right? And this sets up the moment because when I was traveling and were cooking in France and cooking in wherever I was cooking in Switzerland, the 2 things you never saw was women and people of color. And so it's very clear to you to set up, this is what when I get a chance to hire, obviously I'm going to hire a much, much, much bigger, in a diverse way, right? And so my kitchen became known as, obviously, there was all kinds of people in the kitchen. I didn't think about, I'm going to do this based on diversity. I'm going to do it because it's just a better energy, a better kitchen.
Oh, God, yes.
So like when
in any situation.
So when like when Leanne Wan came, for example, and when Richie came and worked with me for 3, Richie, and like poor Carmichael that is now working with David Chang's worked with David Chang for years. You know what I mean? Richie and Paul was 18, 19 years old, and they worked with me for 3 years.
Babies,
and obviously the fact that Rich is now running probably the biggest restaurant empire in New York City with the 4 Seasons and everything that him and his partners has achieved, right? But so those were the type of individuals that wanted to be there, and Leanne moved from Hawaii to come and cook with us. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it was a lot of people like that just felt that there was others were welcome, and the spirit around that was welcome. And we were cooking Scandinavian food, which was before the new Nordic, right? It was something that was rare. And they want to be part of that.
I remember going in the late 90s to Aquavit, and it was during a restaurant week because that's when I could afford to go.
Smart, good time, good.
Restaurant. And I remember going to lunch, and I was so nervous walking in because I felt like I was such a little ragamuffin. My torn thrift store clothes. Just trying.
Nice.
I think I'd bought
just what we needed.
I think I'd bought a couple of like super cheap like business suits that were probably like super super polyester and stuff because I was so nervous about this because, you know, I moved to New York, you know, after grad school in 96 and stuff. And I, you know, it was broke for a very long time, but I had heard, okay, Aquavit, this is the place to be. And I remember going in there, sitting by the waterfall and distinctly remembering the amazing smell of that and having roll mops for the first time. Yeah. And it blew my mind. I had never had these flavors before, this pickled fish, this thing, and just going out of there, like, just dazzled, absolutely dazzled, and made to feel like I fit, like it was okay that even though, you know, I saw definitely wealthy people there and stuff, like there was still room for me as this like broke ass art kid to come in there. And those flavor, I mean, that was a meal that I had in the late 90s and I still remember it so vividly. And you really did that. And I remember that other feeling when I walked into the bar at Red Rooster for the first time. You hadn't been open that long, and just looking around thinking, look at all the beautiful people. And it felt like so many different kinds of people who had all gotten dressed up because it felt like everybody knew it was special to be there, and just the feeling that it had to walk in there. That's a culture that you set from the top. We're like, this is going to be a place where people, they know it's special, but it's also regular because it's neighborhood kind of thing. So how do you begin to have an idea of that kind of restaurant? How do you staff it? How do you make sure that people, because you were talking to the back of the house, how do you make sure that's the case in the front of house where people know that they're welcome?
Well, I think it's, you know, you want to do something that is feel-based, right? It's, for me, it's very rhythmic. It's feel-based, right? And then being able to, with Aquavit, I lived that culture, so I knew it in my gut, right? I know exactly what month the matjes herring is the perfect time, right? So I knew how the texture of a matjes herring should be, the brininess. With Red Rooster, I didn't. You know, just because you're black doesn't mean that you know the history of the migration, right? So I approached it completely different. I studied Harlem. I moved to Harlem 7 years before we opened Red Rooster, and had to do what we did, what my father taught me when you come to my fishing village, right? You have to speak to the elderly. You have to, you know, there's certain rules in the fishing village that you have to kind of live by. And it took me 7 years to train and learn about the migration. Not so much textbook, but what came culturally, what came out of it, right? And I did not grow up with fried chicken or collard greens, so I did not know what would be the perfect brine and what should I do, dark meat, bone in or skin off, or you know all of these different ways. And when you don't have childhood memory from something, and yet you're supposed to cook comfort food, it's very difficult.
That's terrifying.
So as a challenge, it was right up there with creating a vegetarian or bite menu circa 1998. And I love that challenge, right? Because that keeps you curious, right? And I needed that because I was in desperately need of home and community, you know, and Harlem has given me and my family so much more than I'm giving Harlem. Although we're an extremely successful restaurant and we created a festival and we have a lot of sort of goalpost stuff that you can look at. But post 9/11, I started to ask myself the real questions.
Right, yeah.
Why am I here? And I realized post now that it was a slight depression. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Coming out of my father passed away and I couldn't go to the funerals and I was always away from my family. And we all deal with that very differently. 9/11, I cooked at the Towers a week before. A lot of people I knew passed. And you start asking yourself a meaningful question. Why am I here? And my mom and I started to talk a lot on the phone about this. Why are you always cooking only for the 1% or the rich people? Cook something more affordable. Cook in the neighborhood you live. You know, you didn't grow up this way. So she was really challenging myself on these things. And so I lived by the Time Warner Center, right behind it, and
that's some of the most expensive real estate.
Well, where I lived it wasn't, but anyway, I lived right behind it. But I'm saying, I didn't know my neighbors, and it wasn't my neighbor's fault.
Yeah.
So I had that tunnel vision. You wake up, you're convenient to go to work. You didn't talk to anyone.
Thing.
Yeah. And I was in desperate need for a neighborhood. Community. And I think that's what I found in Harlem. And I didn't know it first. The first 2-3 years was odd, and then I was like, I belong. And it was doing cooking classes in the community. It was tasting food that didn't end up on someone's blog. It was completely setting out. Although it was only 4-mile or 3-mile move, it was like moving to a new country with a new language.
Yes. I mean, I remember my sort of entree to Harlem is I have a friend who has sadly passed, and she... Dr. Ellen Robinson, a.k.a. Mama Diva, a.k.a. China Doll.
I love it.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful woman who was best friends with my friend Eric. They had such an interesting relationship. It was very Scott Peacock, Edna Lewis, in that he was a young gay white man and she was an older black woman, and they were best friends.
Yeah.
They met working at the makeup counter at Estee Lauder.
Beautiful.
And became friends. And she was a longtime Harlem resident. She used to go to the balls.
Yeah,
she
of course.
was just an absolute fixture in the neighborhood. And I
like
remember
Paris is Burning.
Yeah. And she was just this extraordinary woman.
Beautiful.
And I would go to her home for Thanksgiving every year. And when I was a young misfit in New York, I think one of my first Thanksgivings alone in New York, and a friend of mine from work said, come and she'll make you feel warm, and I sort of thought like, okay, and I hadn't been to Harlem before.
Yeah, and you didn't know.
I went to her house, and it's one of the most generous things that anybody has ever done for me. She accommodated me because I was mostly vegetarian, and she cooked too. But the way that her place was a community hub, people knew that they could just come in and get a plate.
Yeah.
And it was, it was fun, which is all different kinds of people coming in and out of her apartment. And I would see her slip $5 to somebody who needed it and stuff. And it was just such an incredible way to experience the neighborhood, because she was so of the place and had been living in her apartment for such a long time. I knew her across the hall. Neighbors paid 10 times what she did, and it was such a great thing. But because she was so established there, I felt so lucky to have sort of that view into her life, and that she was so kind to make me,
part of it.
Yeah, and that was, and she did it through food, that people would come in and get this plate from her and stuff. And I, had the privilege of having Thanksgiving with her every year for a very long time until she passed. And it's just funny when I walked into Red Rooster, having that same sort of food as a connector, and there were some of the same dishes that she served. She had taught me to make collard greens.
Yeah,
and it was a beautiful thing. But to walk into your restaurant and having that same thing, was that because there's such an established culture, and as you were saying, the rules. I learned the rules from her. I very much learned the rules from her. Did you feel like you had to earn a place being there, being part of the community? Did people sort of say yes, this is right, this is wrong? How did you learn to sort of be a good citizen of Harlem?
No, but it's being a good neighbor, and those skills are something that you don't find on a blog or you don't read in a paper. It's like being part of it, right? I knew that I could offer something. Yeah. And that was cooking. Yeah. So I did cooking classes for after church programs. I cooked in the park, where, by the way, also I learned about, the best cornbread is in church, or it's being in and of the community is not a name tag. That is being around and knowing, speaking to someone, photographer like Dawood Bey, for example, that has documented from Harlem from the 40s all the way up to now, looking at Gordon Park's images, going to the Schomburg to understand menus. So that is the documentation part of it. The other part of it is being in the community, right? And that could be, cooking at a block party. Very different. Well, we cooked for events and charities for the last 15 years in New York City. And sometimes you don't know why you're there. Here, I'm in my neighborhood. It's very clear and apparent why I'm here. So it was shifting. It was literally not looking at. I knew that moving to Harlem, it was one part of me that I had to give up. and one part of me, a new part that I had to gain. And that's part of changing, right? And that, I wasn't afraid of that. I was excited about that, right? And Harlem doesn't operate on necessarily awards and stuff like that. It has its completely different language. And then eventually time will make sure that people look at Dapper Dan, right? He did fashion, way and style.
Yeah.
And he didn't do it based on if Vogue would come and get him. He just did it because it was his craft in his neighborhood. And eventually time, caught up. And I look at it the same way. Like, I knew that, whatever was the standard before, I would not no more longer be on those lists. And that's okay. That could be, that you can have different thoughts on that. But I was like, no, this isn't the forever game. This is going to be longer. This is going to be more meaningful. And this is what I need at this moment, right? And this is what my community needs. And this is how I can assist and contribute. And whether, this value proposition that we have around urban communities and food, it's not in an article. This is decisions that America carefully crafted together since Jim Crow about these food apartheids that have.
Absolutely.
This is not something that just happened.
Yeah.
This is a good 50, 60 years of carefully put together of people who have and don't have. So how do you create a dining destination out of that? It's not a 5-minute conversation. And that's why this humble beginning for me in 2000 started at 2002. I knew this is 30, 40 years of work that I have to put in. And I gladly, and it will look different, right? The first 7 years was the study. Now the restaurant's been open for 9 years. Year 2 was building Ginny's. Year 3, we built the food festival, right? Harlem Meetup, that now 15,000 people are coming to.
That's incredible.
And even that food festival, right? Explaining that, it will be Danielle and Mike from the Crab Shack.
Right.
It will be Massimo Botoro and Aisha that sells cookies. That's a very different cooking proposition than a normal food festival.
Yeah.
And half of the festival, by the way, is for free. And to even explain to your chef buddies, but to have that incredible buy-in of the Bobby Flays and the Mashama and the Emma Bengtsson and the food stars of ours today saying, no, I want in.
And a lot of that has to do with you have the credibility with so many people. People trust you because you have done this work. And like Marcus says this thing, I want to be a part of it. And that goes a lot toward all the work that you have done, the credibility that you have. Like, that's such a beautiful thing about you is like you have credibility in a whole lot of different worlds. And do you think that is because you come from a lot of different worlds? Like, where does that come from? Is there a need to be a chameleon? Is there you find your place where you find it? Is that a thing that comes naturally to you?
I think two things. I think that the blessings of being Black and the blessings of being an immigrant have put me in so many unique positions. And even being adopted have put me in so many unique positions. So you learn at an early age that, maybe when I was like 10, we had dinner conversations around the word nigger. What does that mean? And we used to say it a lot at home, so you take the value out of it. If everyone says it has zero value, right? But you're 10 and you're 11 and you're 12, and then, that's training.
Right.
Because it's a word that sort of cuts through.
When you said it, I had a body reaction.
No, so that's like, and your parents that are teaching you this, are not of color, but they're practicing what the future's going to withhold, right? And whether you have choices after that, right? And your sisters are a little bit older, understood it better, and then they have to kind of translate it the way sisters and brothers do, you know what I mean, or cousins do, So those were situations that prepared me for this moment. And, going from, being told at a very early age that you can never own a restaurant, you can never lower your ambitions, right? those things create clarity. So what do you do? Like when you worked at 3-star Michelin, and you have these ambitions, and you're part of the tribe. You feel like you're part of the tribe, right? And with women, it's very often a glass ceiling, and it's outside looking. It's the same feeling outside looking in, right? How do you get in, whatever that in is?
Yeah.
So how do you walk around it, and how do you push through? So I think, for me, it came together when I met my birth father. Because part of it you grew up with, and part of it you're just born with. And he died at 90, and was a tribe leader, and you could tell like he had. I realized then like, okay, wow, I was born into someone that had a lot of strength. I didn't know that, right?
Your bones knew it.
Yeah, and you just don't when we have never seen your parents' faces or anything like that. So it was important for me to meet him.
How old were you?
I was 24, 25.
Okay.
This is all in the early 2000s, same time as I realized I'm going to leave Aquavit. I'm going to say goodbye to this world as I know it, that I worked so hard to be part of, in order to enter this new world, right? And doing it very disciplined, but actually planning it out and all of this stuff. But so I met my birth father, and again, we don't speak the same language, but there was things that you can see that we inherited at the same time, and just learning that sense level of strength, and not thinking too much about being a representative, but thinking about the responsibility of that,
So looking at his face, it's an amazing thing when you see somebody who is related to you and shares your DNA. That sort of shock of recognition is it's a really, really strong thing. And I've a lot of my friends are adopted, and and some of them have found their birth parents, and just that there's a chemical thing. There's something that happens. I imagine looking at his face had to be a pretty powerful.
Yeah, it was many things. Like I saw him actually he had a stick, and I saw him from the back when we drove up, and we have the same walk. Like we're
wow.
And I knew right away that's him. It's like because we have like a little, slightly tiny, like just bent on our back. He had this long hair, all gray. So I'm like, all right, I'm not going to be bald. Those are the two things. And then it was just amazing. But and again, because I've lived in so many different places, connecting without speaking the language was not foreign to me.
Right.
But seeing that hut for the first time, walking into that hut, and imagine like 7 people, including myself and my sister, have lived in this hut. It was what I needed to. We all need different things to fuel us, but so that was one thing. But I also want to tell you a little bit about. I felt I needed to move to Harlem because I've also gained so much from African American culture.
Yes.
When you think about the civil rights movement, and as a Black person, every law that ever changed is because of the civil rights movement. So when you speak to Leah Chase, or you speak to Alberta Wright, or you spoke to someone like Sylvia Woods, right? So this idea that women and food would not be equal greatness, it's for me like completely, like I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
But think about risk takers, right? In this moment. So Leah opened a restaurant in the 40s.
Dookie Chase.
Yeah. And she broke the law every day.
Yes, she did.
By staying open, by serving a mixed room, right? So imagine she broke the law for a good time before the laws changed, right? So you look at laws, and then you look at what you have to do, right? And she did what you have to do.
And she let civil rights leaders meet at the restaurant in secret too, which is what a scary proposition.
Scary proposition, but that was more important than and talking about the core word of restaurant, which means to restore your community. She lived that, right? Then you think about someone like Sylvia Woods that took a $5,000 loan in 1962 to open a diner, right? And that's entrepreneurship, but that's also everything, right? Like we're going to set up here. So Black women or women has always been in the core of transforming
Absolutely.
those neighborhoods, right, and keeping the lights on. And there's not, the fact that we didn't have enough value proposition of that, that's on us. That's not on them. And the fact that now people are seeking out that, I think that's amazing. Like when I spoke to, I used to live in Hell's Kitchen in Alberta, right? Jezebel's was on 45th and 9th, and I used to live right across the street. And walking into Jezebel's was a little bit of magic, You sit at the bar. She designed it the way, like straight out of a black vintage shop from the South, something like that, right? It's just her style. It's just fabulous, right? And she could have Denzel Washington and Madonna in the room, but Alberta was the biggest star. She hosted. And do not even think that anyone else. And just hosting with that level. So I was lucky enough to come to New York to meet the Patricks, to meet the Albertas, to be around the
When was
Leahs.
she around?
So Alberta was basically it started in the 80s and all the way. And Alberta had Jezebel's in Paris as well. And that's where Madonna used to go when she came, of course, right? So this idea that black restaurants could grow internationally, of course they could. That was, of course, why not? I'm fabulous, restaurant's going to be fabulous, and this is what we do. And those were the people that I looked at, that was not in many books, that I looked at like, these people are keeping the lights on. And Red Rooster is really a celebration of all of that, right?
Yeah.
And someone like B. Smith.
Yes.
There was a bar called Shark Bar on the Upper West Side that, the way Melba entertains, right? So all of that is really Red Rooster. It's really identity out of all of that. And I was lucky enough to stand in the corner and see it. Could not quite fully understand everything because I didn't grow up in a Baptist church, and my uncle and auntie was not from South Carolina, so I had to study it. And the only way to do it was to be in the community, asking questions, taking part, and learning. And it was an amazing ride.
So you've cited these incredible restaurants owned by Black women, and a lot of them have been around for a long time. Miss Chase is 94, 95, and people who are listening, go to New Orleans and go to Dookie Chase and go there on a Friday lunch if you can. If you can go on a Holy Thursday. Go
nice.
While you can. I mean, there's a reason there is a Disney princess.
Yes.
Who is
that's the reason why Beyonce puts her in her video, you know what I mean?
But then it felt like there was a gap. Like Black women were not getting the capital or access to resources to open places. And now I really, really hope that tide is turning, because you see like the Gray in Savannah. You see Mashama just came in and recorded with us and stuff. So she's very much on my mind. But do you see other Black women getting capital to head up restaurants? And if not so, what can be done to have that next generation of Black women and Black men owning restaurants?
Well, it's a question that requires a little bit longer answer, because it's deeper. It connects to working in hospitality for people of color. I think it's the only tribe in America that has a stigma around it, right? Because a lot of Black people came out of servant and out of the domestic. Yes. So when the next generation in the 50s and the 60s had an opportunity to go to college, they worked really hard to get out of the kitchens. Right. So sending them to cooking school and hospitality school was not necessarily a first choice. So that's one, and you can just park that. Second, which have never happened to any other, very few, I don't know any other country that's done this, right? As an immigrant, I could get a bank loan, but as an African American, I couldn't get a bank loan. Now think about that. That is not a small thing. That is everything, right? Yes. So no access to capital and a stigma, right? And then in the 70s, when cooking becomes a profession, right? If you look at a lot of there's two types of restaurants emerging. There's either the restaurants in pre-segregation integration restaurants that are neighborhood, very often what we consider soul food restaurants. Or if you go to the south, there could be barbecue restaurants, but they're very much mom and pop, right?
And very much in a sort of niche.
Yeah, it's a niche. Then out of that comes very few Black chefs that are now chefs in their restaurants, but they don't get the title. So they're sous chefs, but they're actually chefs. So they don't get the salary. So what happens with a lot, and there's still this tribe left at the Waldorf Astoria and big hotels. So in order to support their families, they become servers in front of the house instead, right? So a whole generation of talent is now moved out of the kitchen and said, hey, to pay my bills, I'm going to be a banquet server instead or something like that.
Because you can get better tips.
Yes,
and
exactly. Yeah. So because at that point in the 70s, when cooking becomes a craft, cooking stems out of French as we know it, right? Although cooking's been around for thousands of years.
They get the credit.
And then the second tribe out of that are Swiss or Germans, right? So still, there's someone like Patrick Clark that cuts through all of that. And then you look at Alberta, right? And then you look at the Sylvias of the world. They're still carving out their own piece. Alberta is not necessarily coming from the cooking. She comes from the entertainment, right? Which is a little bit different. So she hosts more than she thinks about the recipes. So my whole point is that the aspirations of being a chef might not be there because we're supposed to go to do economics or other jobs, right? Then you have the stigma. Then you don't have access to capital. So it just doesn't become an aspirational work the way other professions are, right?
Yes.
And all of that combined, then you go up into the 80s and the 90s where the gatekeepers are pretty much, it's very few, right? You have the New York Times, you have New York Magazine, you have Bon App, you have Food and Wine. Of course, you have the gourmets of the world. And although we've been great at every April, there's an Italian month. There's never been celebration of, like, forget just Black History, right? Month. We've never done a deeper dive on creating these aspirations for tourists within our own country, right? So saying, go to Oakland and eat. Go to NOLA to eat and seek out these restaurants, right? It might be one article a year, but the way we invested back in Italy months every April.
Right.
Think about that for decades. That's
France month.
Yeah, France month, right? So we've done a great job of invest of what the aspiration should be internationally. People with money in America probably know more about Tuscany than they do know about Newark or Harlem in terms of what the taste bud is, right? Now, that's crazy.
Yes, agreed.
So and then you say, well, where does Black women fit into this? Chefing then was also very different than our industry is today. Today you can have a blog. Today you can have a restaurant. Today you can have a daytime restaurant. You can carve out a space very differently than you could before. And I think that's why also, because of social media, the gatekeepers are, not the same. And when I think about Adrian Cheatham, an amazing talent, right?
Yes.
And we worked together very closely for 3 years. Mashama just did a dinner with us for Harlem Meetup, right? Think about what Nina is doing in NOLA, right? I think about what Naisha is doing in LA. You think about, and I can mention 15 other incredible women of color that are cooking that have not yet got the same level of recognition, but are on the same level in terms of narrative and cooking and know-how. I don't know if there's more, but there's more people that can support each other and talk to one another. And that's what why I love this moment so much. Very much my job in this is to be able to set a place, right? So to make sure that I mentor Adrian, to make sure that we broadcast the dinner with Mashama, to make sure that, we do these things to set the table and then pull back in the background and and just assist in any way we can.
I think that's this is all so important. And with the Food and Wine class of Best New Chefs, we are setting each person up with. Have some of this water.
Thank you.
We are setting each person up with a mentor because we realize that people are not getting that. They're not getting those role models and stuff. And there was one person who, we asked them what they want, and she specifically wanted a woman of color to mentor her. Nice. And Nina Compton beautifully stepped up and is going to help.
Great.
And we just. It's you brought up the publications and the gatekeepers, and we've more and more been having this conversation about how it's our ethical and moral responsibility to step up to offer mentorship, and if we're putting somebody in the spotlight, it is our responsibility also to give them good mentorship, because it's really incredibly scary to be exposed in front of the world. All of a sudden you have this new audience, and people haven't necessarily taught you how to deal with the media, or so many things come with that kind of exposure. So it's something that we're looking at. What I really hope for having a spotlight on a lot of these chefs is we're partnering with MoFad over the next year to do this. There's going to be this incredible exhibit that is about the history of Black cooking in the U.S. and really shining a light on so many of these people who've been cooking for a long damn time, and sort of the roots of that, but also having the contemporary chefs who are coming in. There was a dinner a couple weeks ago, and I got to meet a lot of sort of young chefs who were coming up who I hadn't gotten to meet before, and thinking, shame on me for first of all not knowing and digging enough, but
it's not. I mean, you can't put it on. I think you show a level of curiosity and desire, and that because you want to meet great people in our industry, so that curiosity will drive you to some amazing. And I think as a chef you should be curious, as a journalist you should be curious, as
human,
as a diner.
you
know
that's
what I mean?
the thing.
So once you have that, I mean, I call this moment the new noir, right?
Yeah,
it is.
I love that.
It is a moment, and I think about everything you said, but end of the day, you got to go your own way.
Yeah.
Or you're going to go my way, right? That's it. Like, there is no... Everything for me that I admire, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always been oddballs. It's not...
Yeah.
And
the
maybe
beautiful misfits, as you say.
and I'm like, whether I was a kid and I saw a picture of Fela Kuti the first time, or whether I saw David Bowie the first time, right?
Beautiful freak.
Or I saw Prince, or like when I think about my childhood, right? Like in cooking, I looked at Basquiat, like not because of cooking, because there was fine art, and here was this kid doing that, right? So for me, it's always been you gotta figure out, are you gonna go what is the tune, what is direction you're gonna go in, and that might not fit into this moment, right? But you still got to believe in it so much, because if you don't believe in it enough, it's not going to be strong enough anyway, right? Music has been a place for me that I see it more, when something sounds odd, but it's the right music for you, or when something does food, it's right. You got to go your own way.
Those moments are locked into my heart.
And I think as one of the blessings of being Black is that we always have to go our own way.
Yeah. And
I never look at like list or who's the latest here. It doesn't. That's like you have to operate on a level that has both humility and arrogance, because you just got to go. And if curry sorbet with oyster is your thing, now do the best goddamn curry sorbet with oyster in the world, right? And these things may or may not ever come, but if you keep doing it, and that's what speaks to you, right? Someone will find out, and that somebody will snap, tweet, Insta, whatever it is, and it will come to you. And I think Dap is such a brilliant example of that. It was not following fashion. It was following his inner core mission of being in a community, of a community, for people, and then the world will come to that. And that's honestly, I don't want to be quasi about it, but that's why that's how I look at it. I still look at someone like Leah. I still look at someone like Fela Kuti. I still look at Prince. I don't know with chef or what list. I have zero interest to it. I'm committed to food, and I know some amazing people in food, and I'm so excited to share and tell their story.
I love that. You're such a good storyteller. You're a good hype man for other people, which I've always appreciated.
Yeah, a little
about you.
flavor's not bad.
I find the people who I love and I want to shout their praises and be their hype man and go out there and.
Can I just say one more thing about this?
Yeah,
Because
of course.
I think that I was thinking about actually it was last year, because as you were you gathered all the chefs together at a food conference
In Aspen.
Yeah, and it was very sweet. And I was actually, crying with AZ.
Oh, I've got a lot of credit.
We were standing on the corner,
Yeah.
and Zimmerman was just like really. He was just hugging me. We're like,
Yeah.
it was so random. We were outside the hotel, and it's like people coming in, and I was just standing there bawling on his shoulder. It was like really. I was just like, it was just a moment, and we talked about that. But I think that the human side of chefing, right, is that we've transformed so much, right? Think about the fact that you can get any recipe you want in your phone on your way to work, right? And the fact that people are going to respond to that. We are so far away from why a generation got into food, right? Cooking for hundreds of years, as we knew it, was told by French people, 99% out of French men. If you were not a Frenchman, maybe you were Swiss or maybe even Italian, right? I'm not saying that's right, but that's the school that was taught to us. And then you have these amazing people like Julia and Jacques and Alice Waters and Leah that just opened up other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the farmer can actually be linked to the restaurant, and it's happening in Berkeley. It does not have to be with a French accent. Whoa, what a new idea, right? Groundbreaking, exactly. Yeah. And it got a little bit more opened up, and eventually you have people like Nobu that, you realize that all good food doesn't have to come from France. And it sounds like so natural today, right? But it wasn't for a very, very long time. So out of that came a hierarchy that a whole generation of amazing chefs came up, and we laugh at this, but we came up abused.
Absolutely.
So
physically, mentally, emotionally,
on every level,
everything.
Right? So, when I worked in Switzerland and France, I had a 7-minute rule that I threw up every day, right? And I knew in 7 minutes how to throw up, clean myself up, take my apron off right before I would throw up, run to the bathroom, clean myself off, come back. If I can do all of that in 6 minutes, and then go back on the line, and no one would notice. My partner would notice.
Is this from stress?
Stress and nervous, and like someone screaming at you in French, and you learn French, and someone screams at you in German,
throwing something
at you, or punching, all of the above, right? And the only good thing about being black there is that at least they were equal opportunists. Everybody got yelled at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so you deal with that, right? Yeah. And it goes somewhere in the body. It goes somewhere.
Yes.
And so the whole tribe of the next sort of the chef that comes through up in the 90s and comes up in the early 2000s, we come out of that and we all know that we should not do it this way. This is not going to happen on our dime. But that obviously, it takes a twist and it takes a turn, and I'm not...
Trauma alters your brain.
Yeah. So there's a whole generation that came up abused.
Yeah.
And there's so little actually talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that I think we should forgive and forget, but there's that, just set pause around that. If you would ask those questions more, did you come up abused? What type of abuse was around? Like, just open a conversation around it, which I know that you're working on so much. I think that's another way to talk about what you're never going to go back to, right? Can we as an industry, and we can, evolve just as we've done with ingredients, just as we've done with medium, and creating great spaces, safe spaces, and know what we're not going to go back to, right? And I think that's what's great about this moment in the conversation you're having. You're opening up another dialogue So those were the dark times. We're not going back to that. And now how do we sort of keep what's good about our industry? Because the same people that got abused are also some of the most incredible teachers, chefs, community leaders, some of the most generous people you will ever meet in your life. And those are polar opposite, but they're both in our industry.
Oh, I've seen people have to do the very active work of rewiring their brain, essentially. People who I've had a lot of conversations with who say, like, yeah, I was abused coming up, and I was, for a long time, that screaming asshole in the kitchen who threw, who yelled, who do whatever, because I didn't see another way. And then a lot of them got to a point where maybe they broke, whether it was with like a physical breakdown, whether they had an emotional breakdown, whether they got sober, whatever this thing is. And then they realized, I can't do that anymore, and had to unlearn all of that. But they have a lot of that push-pull of, how do I still achieve the same kind of excellence and not have it come from this place, oh, I paid my dues, so you have to as well.
But I was around a couple of deaths at a very early age, and so that gives you a very clear what not to.
Yeah.
And it scared the shit out of me. So I was chef at 23 years old. I have no right to be chef at 23, and I was not supposed to be. But my chef died. He OD'd.
Oh, Jesus.
And the night when it happened, he went crazy on a young CIA student, an incredibly young kid working with us. And it was a bad Saturday night, and it was just, everybody knew this is a bad day, this is bad. Ignore what we saw, and we just, moved on for the next service.
Mm-hmm.
And we were all scared.
Shut up and cook.
Yeah, shut up and cook. And I was just like, let me just get my knives and get out of here. And, when service is over, and everyone knew it's bad. No one looked each other in the eyes. It was just like, let's get the hell out of here. And some of the team went out to party, and this was a wonderful guy at the same time, but he just had issues.
Yeah.
And he OD'd and died that night. And it's horrible.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't deserve to die, and the kid didn't deserve to get abused, and it was just bad, gone worse, gone horrible, and now there's no comeback. Now it's just bad. And that gives you clear, what the line is and what not to cross over from every aspect. And no one can tell me that didn't happen. All those 20 people that were there in that room knew it happened. And then you have the ultimate of the young chef. He was just 31, 32 when it happened. He died. And it just scared me forever, So I had a couple of, Switzerland, it was a couple of things that happened that you just there was all around this stress and drugs and all this shit. So I was always in fear of it because I've seen it. And I don't want anyone to have to go through those lessons, but it's there,
It's so present.
And you can ask any chef from that era also, probably been around similar things. And it's just something that was like the tax of coming up in a certain era and pushing through everything. And it shouldn't be that tax,
That's actually why I started Chefs with Issues, the unacceptable loss. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, I don't want to hear about another death. I don't want to hear about another, whether it's a suicide or a slow suicide, as it often is. The month after I started it, there were 3 suicides in the industry, and they happen constantly. And when I started really talking about this publicly, I got a lot of oh, finally we're doing this. And then there was a certain amount of pushback about why are you trying to tell us what to do? You've never worked in a kitchen and, shut up and cook. The day that you were talking about when we got people together, it was a week after Anthony Bourdain took his own life. And that was an unignorable moment for a lot of people. And that particular day, we got about 30 some people together in the basement of a restaurant that wasn't open and cried. We cried and talked about how to cope and how to bring the conversation to other communities and move it forward. And this year, given this talk at Mad Symposium in 2016 and talked about it, and there was, half and half. People wanted to talk about it, people didn't. In 2018, everybody did, because that was, we lost this person who was this lion of our industry and who really, he was the line cook made good. I always think, and
there's many people in people's gonna culturally, like you talk about speaking about something in Mad. Now you're not in San Francisco, you're not in New York, you're in Copenhagen. So you're in culturally, this lives and feels very differently.
Yeah.
Just and people deal with this very differently based. It's not just all a New York state of mind, right?
Oh, I was
and
talking
I think
to a
that's
Swedish.
and I think that's great that you brought it. You had the guts to stand there and talk about something, because it does live differently in Japan, in Copenhagen, in San Francisco, and how we're culturally allowed to speak about things. It's just a very culturally different place. So I think that the fact that you have a room that is 50-50, that shows as a sign of normalcy, because people are going to come to it, how their culture are allowed to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that you open it up, anytime anybody opens something up, it's uncomfortable in the beginning.
We gotta deal with it. I mean, I always say it's awkward if your sous chef cries in front of you, or your line cook or whatever, but would you rather be crying at their funeral? I mean, that's the stakes of it, really. Awkwardness. I give a talk sometimes called "An Awkward Conversation Never Killed Anyone." It's got to happen, whether it's around mental health, whether it's around race, whether it's around sexual assault, whatever like that. We have to have those conversations.
But diversity, I mean, is wide, right? It's culturally, it's sexually, it's race, it's all of these things. And I think that any community as we are have different people in it. Some people cook, some people document on it, some people are diners, some people are all of the above, right? So I think that it doesn't matter who drives the conversation as long as we're generally in the conversation. And you need different stakeholders to drive this dialogue forward. So whether you're have been a line cook or not, it's almost like that's like a it's either here or there, right? And what's more important is that we as a culture are dealing with all aspects of what is very demanding, but also very privileged. It's a privilege for me to be part of this industry. It's a privilege for me to have to raising a lot of cooks and being able to do that, and that people still want to know what we have to say. So I don't look at it as a burden, but I do think that you have to set out your own way. You can't look at so much of these so-called pressure things. You have to set out your own goals, no matter what. And each place has different. If your goal is to have 20 seats every night filled, let's do that. And let's do that well. If your goal is to have 150 seats, there's different. If your goal is to just increase the knowledge and the culture in the restaurant, that will then lead to the 20 seats or whatever that is. And there's no list. There's no outside validation in many ways. You have to really be strong on your inside validation. And that's hard. It's really hard because you're out there in the beginning and no one else is listening, it feels like, but someone is listening, I think there's some great examples of that with No Passport. I've been so fortunate to be able.
Beautiful show. Yeah.
Thank you. I've been fortunate to go to these big cities and meet some great immigrant communities, and at an early stage, be part of let's say Seattle and a restaurant like Archipelago, which is husband-wife team, is really cooking and serving and thinking about your experience, or see Indigo with Jonathan Rhodes in Houston, really being there early and watching him and his wife, in a very rough part of town, setting a new experience, right? So I see that this dialogue of our community is happening all over the country. Some people are being broadcasted and some people are not, but that's not the reason why they went into it. Archipelago or Indigo did not go into it because they went into because they felt they had something to say, and they can really make a difference in their communities.
Yeah. What would you say to Marcus from 20 years ago. Grab Marcus 20 years ago by the shoulders. What do you want to tell him?
I wish in many ways that I could have done it in a way that I wouldn't have missed out so much on family matters. You know, funeral, birthdays, graduations, just family matters. You know, my grandparents, like just that. I just did not know how to take a break and how to. Part of it was because I couldn't travel because of my like true level of being an immigrant, right? You're waiting for your papers, you can't go anywhere. Just taking more time out, taking time off, like real vacation, and so that downside, that I think would have helped a lot for the development of the relationships within you know, my extended family.
Yeah.
And just being able to do, I just had no vocabulary for it. You know, I had no clue.
Yeah.
Absolutely no clue.
Hopefully somebody young will hear that and realizing like, you know, as I forget who I was talking to recently said, it's just dinner.
Yeah.
So you are incredible about like with your show with No Passport, with just everything you do with Harlem Eat Up and stuff. You're a great hype man for everyone else, and you do so much for other people with all the projects you do. This is a moment, I would say, like the Oprah moment, like I believe in saying things out loud, a thing that you want for yourself. What is the selfish thing that you want for you that you can, here's where you let the universe help you. Say the thing so the universe can come and help you get this thing, whatever it is.
I wish that, honestly, that the farmers markets in urban communities would be affordable and culturally relevant and numerous way of paying, so people in and of those communities can actually be part of it. I talk a lot to my son about it. He's only 2.5. Like, hey, when you grow up, it's going to be normal for us to just go to this farmer's market. It's not going to be an event, you know. When you grow up, I'm like, if we see a police officer, I'm like, you're going to run over to him and give him an apple or something like that. I talk about this, like, this is, rather than have to, that might be the talk as a black man I will have to my son, that is positive to meet a police officer.
Yeah.
Versus, should I have the talk with him? And I think about what that talk should be. And I think about, if we do this right, I think the talk with Zion at 11 is not going to be about avoiding police officers. It's not going to be that farmers market is just for certain people that have a certain amount of money. So I think about that a lot.
Oh, I'm excited for your kid.
Yeah.
Like, I want him to have that. I want you to have that those moments with your son. Oh, we have some lighter questions.
Oh, good.
I know. What is your comfort food?
I have Swedish. There's a cod roe conserva, like I grew up with, and it's like a paste. It's called Kalles Caviar. If you're not Scandinavian, you're not gonna dig it, but it's amazing. It's great. I put it on crisp bread, and I'm off, ready to go.
Where do you get it?
When I go back home, I just, like, fill it up.
Fill up a tub.
Yeah.
We all have those things.
Yeah,
that are like
it ain't pretty. And most people, if you're not from the culture, right, the facial expressions are amazing. I mean, it's like literally, how can you possibly like this? And it's amazing.
I want to try this.
Yeah.
I love really bold flavors and stuff. Like, I want that. I love that. Oh, what is the last meal you had that made you emotional?
I think, honestly, eating and cooking with Jonathan at Indigo, his thought process and his hustle with his wife, how hard they...
And where is it?
In Houston.
Okay.
That was... Because it wasn't just the food, it was the amount of thought process that went into it, and doing it where he's doing it. It's amazing.
I love it. What is the last meal?
Well, I have to say, cooking with Mashama in Harlem, Mashama owned it, right?
Mhm.
Mashama and Emma cooked. So we do this luminaire dinner, and I always have female chefs doing that dinner. We had amazing, like Angela from Mission Chinese, and formerly from Mission Chinese, and Dominic, and like the best, like just always. And I just felt like this year I wanted Emma and Mashama, and they just crushed it. And it wasn't just about the dinner. Like Mashama and Emma, they rapped. All the cooks came to them,
Oh,
and they danced afterwards, and it was their moment. And for me, it was just like that worked. That worked. That was good
that's
for the soul, you know.
I saw Mishama before she was going to do that, and
Mhm.
the week before I'd gotten to see her get her James Beard
Yeah.
Award, and it's God, what a joy!
I mean,
It's
my
been
favorite picture from that is when she's at the airport.
Well, I didn't
And
see
she,
that.
oh, it's awesome. You have to go back on Insta, and she's flexing. She's like in the airport with the award, and just it's a best picture.
God, I love her.
She's flexing. It's great. It's
can't-
awesome.
I can't wait to read the book that
Yeah,
she
yeah.
is writing with Jono.
Yeah.
Like, was it Black, White, and Gray? I'm so psyched for
Yeah,
this.
it's great.
Oh my God! What is the last time that somebody cooked for you in their home? What did they make?
I had a really good fufu in no, actually I would say there's a Filipino dish called kare kare, which is sort of like I had it with, you can have it with oxtail, and you can have it with, I actually had it with oxtail and crab, which was amazing. At the chef Melissa, we were at her house, and we cooked it. She cooked it with her father and mom, and her dad operates their home kitchen like he's an executive chef, although she's the chef. So her father is like, knife, and they have to give her a knife.
Oh my God!
It's amazing. This thing is like, we all become like line cooks for her dad, which is amazing. Like, we had to chuck oysters with like big, not oyster knives, and he just called it out, and everyone had to do it. It was amazing.
Oh my God!
It was good. It was really good.
Did anybody take video? Did they?
They shot some of it, but it was just like that moment was just like the minute you enter the kitchen, he just became like chef, and we were all like, it's like cilantro, nice.
Oh
It was
my
awesome.
God!
Awesome.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah.
Now, this is a funny question for you because I have a feeling that you have actually done this a lot. What living musician would you want to cook for, and what would you cook for them?
I'd probably do like a vegetarian tasting for Prince.
What living musician? Oh,
I mean, he lives in my.
I know.
I
I think
can't
we'd
even.
all want to make like breakfast for Prince. I know. Like he's talking about food a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Like who comes walking into the restaurant and you're like, got you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still with Prince. I'm still because it's also music.
Yeah.
Living or not, they gave us so much. So it's
Right. There's that.
like I cannot imagine you're a kid the black kid in the 80s in Sweden. You listen to music, and all of a sudden there's videos, and then you realize that you could be different.
What a beautiful freak.
Do you know what I mean? Like, yes, exactly.
My
And you're
David Bowie moment when I
Yeah.
saw him and thought like,
whoa,
whoa.
yeah, of course. Siggy and all of that stuff. Like, whoa, you can have makeup on, and you can do this stuff, and you can be that. And so that's a Prince for me. It's like, whoa.
And so what? Yeah. So what is the thing you would make? What is the full meal?
I would probably just do like a bunch of really beautiful vegetarian stuff. Especially now with late spring, early summer, so you can do some really, beautiful charred carrot steaks, and you can do just have like really celebrate this moment, but do it weird, like retro as hell, like.
Yeah. A Jello salad.
Just the weirder the better. You have to have some purple.
Oh yeah.
Sweet potato somewhere in there, and
Purple carrots.
and all make it weird, and because it's Prince, probably, which I haven't used in a long time, but bring foam back.
Oh my gosh, some starfish and coffee.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh, beautiful. Last question, and this is a hard one for chefs. I think a lot. You have 5 uninterrupted minutes for self-care. What do you do?
I listen to music. And I mean, like, really listen, like, and go back analog, like, try to find, like, what is that keyboard over there that you don't hear, and just back end it, right? Because so much of food is undertones of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, only the chef knows it's there, but it's really,
Right.
So that's one thing. Love spending time with my family. That is, have nothing to do with food, but it ends up talking about it.
Right.
Also being lucky enough to have these worlds of either soccer or tennis that, like I play tennis with this Rasta man, and he doesn't even know, has no clue what I do. We never talked about it, not ever talked about it. We just hit balls.
So nice.
And he's not interested, never asked me. He talks to me a lot about food and Ital food and, Vital food and all of this stuff. So that's a moment of food, but it's not really. It's about hitting balls and listening to another beat. It's like he brings jackfruit to me, or like just because that's what we need to eat before we play and stuff like that.
Oh.
So those are worlds that are, and then the last one would be the world of art, the arts, right? So thinking through, I'm so monolithic in it, but I enter it in many ways, thinking through my dishes through art, right?
Yeah.
Through really drawing it down and thinking it through that way.
These sound like moments where you are being all of the people who you are, and also getting to step away from anything that you have to be for anybody else.
No, but these also been places that I go to throughout the years for inspiration, but also for understanding what's coming next, right? The art world has always been something that I go to understand. Because a lot of authorship and documentation around Black cooking is you have to dig so deep to find it sometimes, and art has been a way that documented it a little bit, a little bit further, a little bit better. So been able to having conversations around structure with someone like Julie Merherto or Derek Adams helps me think through architectural and design of food.
Well, I hope you get a lot of these moments, a lot of these self-care moments coming up, because you're a busy man. And
it's funny you say that. I don't think about it like that. I don't think about it from that perspective at all.
Well, from the outside.
Well, I think about, like, here is the opportunity to connect, and these are the stories we have to tell. We have to tell them in these sticking moments, right? Whether so the Audible Red Rooster Cookbook was just, I don't care how many hours it took or takes, because we're still not done. Because these voices are very important documentation. And you think about so much about Black excellence, but also Black content. The authorship of that has always been changed. And here's a moment of not changing that. The pitmaster has always been an anonymous person. Of course, it hasn't been, but there was never the person that actually was the pitmaster. The recipe for so many cocktails has always been somebody else, right? So the authorship has always been stolen. So here's a moment of correcting that. So I don't look at that as I love being busy. I'm looking at that as documenting and taking back the authorship of a completely false narrative that has been told for such a long time.
I love that.
So you can't put time on that.
I love that. I love that so much. And I love that. I want to tell people where they can find all of this from you. So they can go to Red Rooster. They can get the
Marcus
Audible
Cooks.
Cookbook.
And Marcus Cooks, we kind of on my Instagram, we'll kind of push out what's coming. But, on Audible, obviously, you can just go on Audible, and it's called Our Harlem, and it's really a labor of love. And I really thank Audible for believing and telling a new way of telling cookbook stories. And I think it can open a door up to tell more stories like that, and it's needed.
Yay. So I want people to find you. Marcus Cooks on all the different social platforms.
Yeah.
Okay. And then your website.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can go and take themselves to Red Rooster or to Ginny's or, find you at Eat Up Harlem or any of these other kind of things. But I want to thank you for
having me,
both today and just for you in general and the conversations that you open and putting the names where they should be back in place.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you to our producers, Jennifer Martinick and Alicia Cabral. Thanks to Douglas Wagner for our delightful theme song. If you like what you heard, please tell a friend, write a review, or rate us. If there's something you'd like for us to talk about or a guest you'd like to hear from, please let us know. You can find me on Twitter at kittenwithawhip. Find out more about the show and catch up on all the episodes at foodandwine.com and Food and Wine's YouTube page. Thanks for listening. Take good care of yourself till next time, and go visit Marcus in Harlem.